Level 1, the applicant. You fill out the form on a government website that looks like it was designed in 2003. No logo. No branding. The URL is a string of letters that means nothing. You submit your details and wait. 3 weeks later, a letter arrives at your flat with no return address. It tells you to attend an assessment at an office building in Vauxhall that you've walked past 100 times without ever wondering what happened inside. You're 22 years old. You studied modern languages at Durham. You speak French and Mandarin well enough to argue in both. You think you're going because of the languages. You are partly. But mostly you're going because someone noticed you 2 years ago at a careers fair and made a note in a file you will never be allowed to read. The assessment center smells like carpet cleaner and institutional coffee. 12 other candidates in the room. None of you make eye contact. You take psychological tests, aptitude tests, language tests, a written exercise where you must compress a 40-page intelligence brief into 4 sentences. You give a 10-minute presentation on a current geopolitical situation. A panel of 3 watches you without smiling. One of them writes constantly. One of them never writes at all. You go home and hear nothing for 6 weeks. Then a second letter. Then a deeper vetting process. Developed vetting clearance takes 9 months. They speak to your parents, your former teachers, your university flatmates, your dentist. They examine every financial record you have ever generated. They ask whether you've had contact with a foreign national in circumstances that felt unusual. You think back through your entire life trying to find anything that felt unusual. Nothing surfaces. You pass. You're offered a position as an intelligence officer trainee. The salary is listed plainly. There is nothing glamorous about the number. You accept before you finish reading the letter. Level 2, the trainee officer. The training program is officially called the development program, though no one calls it that. They call it the course, the way people say the course when they mean the thing that determines whether you survive or don't. 18 months, across multiple facilities, most of which have no visible exterior signage. You learn tradecraft in a Victorian building somewhere outside London. Surveillance detection routes. How to identify a tail, how to lose one, how to confirm you've lost one without signaling to anyone watching that you were ever looking. You walk the same stretch of South London pavement 40 times over 3 weeks until you can reconstruct every shopfront, every CCTV angle, and every natural shadow pool from memory. You learn how to recruit a source. Not the film version. The real version, which involves months of cultivation, of building a relationship with someone who doesn't know why you're building it, of finding the specific pressure in their life that makes cooperation feel like relief rather than betrayal. Your instructor is a woman in her late 50s who spent 11 years running assets in Eastern Europe. She drinks tea from a thermos she brings herself. She says the most important thing in this job is patience. Most officers who fail don't fail because they lack courage. They fail because they cannot wait. You study agent handling protocols, communication security, cover identity construction, report writing, and the legal frameworks governing what you are and are not permitted to do. The legal frameworks take up more time than you expected. You're told this is deliberate. The law is not a constraint that limits the work. It is the architecture that makes it legitimate. You're placed on a 6-month overseas attachment at a station in a European capital. You work undercover as a junior trade attaché. You attend receptions. You have structured conversations about trade policy and investment frameworks. You file reports. Most are assessed as unremarkable. One is flagged as containing something useful. Your section head tells you one useful report in 6 months is about the baseline expectation for a trainee at your stage. You find this less encouraging than he intended. You come back to London. You complete assessments. You pass. You're confirmed as a full intelligence officer. Grade 7. Your name goes into a different system. The work begins properly. Level 3. The Junior Intelligence Officer. You're assigned to a regional section covering the Middle East. You share an open-plan office with 9 other officers who are all more experienced than you, and who show this not through condescension but through a particular quality of quiet that comes from knowing exactly how much of what you hear matters. Your job is to build a picture. You pull from human intelligence, signals intelligence passed to you by GCHQ in summarized form, liaison reporting from partner services, open-source material that requires context before it becomes useful. You build that picture into a written assessment that either confirms what the analysts in the Joint Intelligence Organization already believe or introduces a variable they hadn't considered. Your first real operation involves cultivating a contact inside a regional ministry. He's not hostile to the process. He has his own reasons for talking, reasons that have nothing to do with loyalty to any foreign power and everything to do with a specific grievance inside his own institution. You meet him in 4 different cities over 14 months. The meetings are always in public. You are always someone else when you attend them. The cover holds. He begins providing documentary material that can't be obtained any other way. You write the intelligence reports. You watch your work disappear upward into classification levels you don't yet have access to. Occasionally a senior officer will come to your desk and say that a particular report was noticed. That's the full extent of it. You learn to find it sufficient. Your first brush with operational failure comes in the 2nd year. An asset you've been cultivating for 8 months goes silent. You follow the protocols. You attempt contact through the agreed secondary channel. Nothing. 3 weeks later, a liaison officer from a partner service passes you a report suggesting the asset was detained by their domestic security service. The report doesn't say what happens to him after that. You're told these outcomes are part of the work. You understand that intellectually. You sit with it anyway, in the specific way you sit with things in this job, which is without being able to tell anyone outside the building what you're sitting with. You're promoted to grade 6. You move desks. The new desk has a window. This is considered an improvement. Level 4, the case officer. You're 30. 2 overseas postings, 1 to South Asia, 1 to West Africa. Each runs 2 years. Each requires a different cover identity, a different set of professional habits, a different version of yourself maintained consistently enough to become second nature without ever fully replacing the first. South Asia is where you run your first principal agent. Not a contact, not a developmental. A recruited source with formal access to material carrying direct national security relevance. You handle the communication schedule, the payment protocol, the cover story for every meeting, the contingency plan if any element is compromised. You handle him as a human being with a family and a life that extends far beyond what he provides to you. You know his wife's name. You know his eldest son is struggling at university. You know he has back problems that keep him awake at night. You know these things because a source who trusts their handler shares them, and a source who trusts their handler keeps functioning safely for longer than one who doesn't. He provides material for 3 years. It feeds 2 major government threat assessments. You receive no external credit. The credit would require an explanation, and the explanation would compromise him. He is worth more than the credit. The West Africa posting is different. The station is smaller. For officers covering an area that would justify 12. You stretch. You develop local contacts who are not recruited sources but who function as windows into environments that formal channels can't see. You learn the difference between information and intelligence. Information is anything anyone tells you. Intelligence is information that has been verified, contextualized, and weighed against what you already know. The gap between those 2 things is where most of the work happens. You come home for the 2nd time. Your flat has the particular silence of somewhere that has been empty for 2 years. You buy plants. They die within a month. You buy more plants. You are determined to maintain something living in a space that belongs entirely to you. Level 5, the senior case officer. You're 36. 2 more promotions. You handle complex operations now, multi-strand cases involving several assets in overlapping environments where intelligence from one source must be kept apart from another, because cross-contamination could destroy both. You have a junior officer working under you for the first time. She's 25, speaks Russian and Ukrainian fluently, and has a quality of stillness during assessments that suggests she will outlast most of the people around her. You mentor her the way you were mentored. Not primarily through instruction, but through proximity. You let her watch you make decisions and explain afterwards what went into them, including the uncertainties you navigated without resolution. The most significant operation of your mid-career involves a source inside a foreign intelligence service. You didn't recruit him. He was passed to you by a retiring officer who had run him for 6 years and who decided that operational continuity required a new handler before the old relationship became too personal to function cleanly. You meet the source for the first time in a 3rd country. 4 hours. Almost no operational content exchanged. You're building the relationship from its foundation. He studies you the way you study him. Both of you are assessing whether the other is trustworthy enough to continue. The answer eventually is yes. He provides material over 4 years that shapes 2 foreign policy decisions you can only ever infer from watching the public record. You never know whether your intelligence was the deciding variable. You accept not knowing. The job requires a tolerance for incomplete conclusions that most people in other professions never have to develop. You take a posting to headquarters as a section deputy and stop running operations directly. You manage officers who run them. The transition is harder than you expected. Fieldwork has a texture the office doesn't replicate. You stay too close to the case details, to the point where your section head tells you that you need to let the officers make their own decisions or they'll never develop the judgment to survive the ones you won't be there for. You take the note. You step back. They develop. You watch. Level 6, the section head. You're 42. You run a section of 14 officers covering counterproliferation across a region that includes states actively developing weapons programs and states trying to acquire components from gray market suppliers in jurisdictions where your legal authority is constrained. The bureaucratic weight surprises you even though you were warned. You spend more time in meetings with the budget office than with your operational officers. You write more internal justification documents than intelligence assessments. You represent your section in interagency coordination meetings where MI5, GCHQ, and Defense Intelligence all have competing analytical perspectives and institutional priorities, and where holding your position without accumulating unnecessary friction determines whether your operations get the support they need. You lose an officer on a field detachment when the domestic security environment in his country deteriorates faster than the assessments predicted. He isn't harmed. His cover is assessed as potentially compromised and he's extracted within 72 hours. But the operation he was supporting has to be suspended. 2 years of developmental work into suspension. You write the internal review yourself. You identify 3 points where different decisions could have produced a different outcome. 2 changes go in immediately. The third requires a policy revision that takes 11 months to clear the appropriate approval channels. You authorize your first lethal intelligence operation. Not directly. British intelligence officers don't carry weapons and don't conduct paramilitary actions unilaterally. But you provide the intelligence package to a partner service operation that results in the death of a procurement facilitator whose activities were enabling a weapons program that represented a genuine and documented threat. You sign the legal authority paperwork. You're briefed on the outcome. You file it. You go home that evening, eat a meal, and sleep without difficulty. You will later understand that the absence of difficulty is itself information about what this work has made you. You won't quite know what to do with that. Your section loses a development officer to burnout. She was one of your best, the same junior officer you mentored a decade earlier. She is not weak and the burnout is not weakness. It's the accumulated weight of sustained covert operational stress over years without adequate institutional support. You make a formal recommendation to the welfare office. You visit her at home. You bring nothing, say almost nothing, and stay for 2 hours. She comes back to the service 18 months later in an analytical role that doesn't require fieldwork. She's exceptional at it. You consider this an outcome, not a failure. Level 7, the controller. You're 47. A directorate. Multiple sections, multiple regions, 80 officers under your authority in varying capacities. A deputy handles day-to-day operational management. You handle the institutional relationships, the senior liaison work, and the decisions that require a signature at your level. Liaison is its own discipline. You spend time with counterparts from the CIA, the DGSE, the BND, the Mossad, the Australian Secret Intelligence Service, and a half-dozen smaller services whose contributions to specific operations justify keeping the relationship alive. Each has its own institutional culture, its own risk tolerance, its own constraints. The Americans bring resources and reach no other service can match. They also carry a confidence that sometimes confuses scale with accuracy. The French are precise and territorial. The Germans are methodical and cautious in ways that reflect an institutional memory of what happens when intelligence services operate without adequate oversight. You navigate all of it carefully and without sentiment. You deal with a political crisis when an operation sanctioned under your predecessor becomes the subject of a parliamentary intelligence oversight inquiry. The operation was legal. The authority was properly obtained and documented. The intelligence it produced was genuine and significant. None of that prevents the inquiry, which is examining a specific procedural question about ministerial notification timing. You prepare the service's evidence submission. You appear before the committee in closed session. You answer every question accurately and completely within the classification constraints you're permitted to observe. The committee issues a report with a qualified criticism and a recommendation for a process improvement. The process is improved. You consider the oversight mechanism itself necessary. You've read the history of what intelligence services look like without it. You don't resent the committee for the reminder. You brief the Foreign Secretary on a developing situation where the intelligence picture is partial. You tell her what you know with confidence, what you assess with moderate confidence, and what you don't know. She asks about the variables you can't see. You describe their shape without pretending you can resolve them. She makes a decision. 3 months later, the situation develops in a direction that neither confirms nor contradicts your assessment. These outcomes don't appear in post-event reviews. The reviews examine the ones that go wrong. The ones that resolve into ambiguity are quietly archived. Level 8, the Deputy Chief. You're 52. The appointment came after a selection process you were barely aware of until it was largely over. That is how these things work at this level. There is no interview in any conventional sense. You are assessed through years of observation by people who have watched your decisions accumulate into a pattern they either trust or don't. They did. As Deputy Chief, you're inside the building almost entirely now. You travel on liaison missions rather than operational postings. You see the full intelligence picture across all of the services directorates at once. The weight of that picture is not the weight of any individual crisis. It's the weight of everything running simultaneously, all active operations, all developmental work, all counterintelligence concerns, all institutional pressures, every working day. You manage a counterintelligence investigation that runs for 3 years and ends without the certainty that counterintelligence investigations rarely provide. There is enough to be concerned. There is not enough to be certain. You apply the concern operationally, adjusting access protocols and compartmentation practices without announcing what you're doing or why. The individual under suspicion either notices and is guilty of exactly what you suspect, or notices and has the professional experience to understand why such measures are standard. You cannot know which. You operate accordingly. You deal with the death of a serving officer on an authorized overseas operation. The circumstances are ambiguous. The partner service provides an account that is internally consistent and externally unverifiable. You conduct a parallel internal review using every source available. The review does not resolve the ambiguity. You write to the officer's family. You tell them he served with distinction and that his work contributed directly to outcomes that protected British interests. Both statements are true. The letter is also incomplete, and you know this as you sign it. You add nothing. The incompleteness is a function of classification, not personal choice. You made your peace with that distinction over 30 years of living inside it. You attend the service's internal memorial for officers who died in the course of their duties. It's held in a room with no windows. The names on the wall have no dates, no ranks, no identifying information that would allow their operations to be reconstructed. Each name is a person you either knew or knew of. A few you trained alongside. One of them was the first source you ever recruited, not a British officer but someone who died in circumstances traceable, at least in part, to information he provided to you specifically. You stand in that room for the same reason you stand at military cemeteries. Because the count should be kept by someone. Level 9, the Chief. You're 56. The appointment is announced publicly, which is a peculiarity of this role that the others don't share. The Chief of the Secret Intelligence Service is a name in the public record. You give a single interview to a single journalist at a single occasion selected by the Communications Office. You say what can be said. The rest, which is to say the substance of everything you actually do, remains exactly as it has always been. You brief the Prime Minister twice a week during active situations, weekly otherwise. You're one of several intelligence chiefs who do, but the foreign intelligence brief is yours exclusively. The working relationship with the PM has to be functional without becoming personal. Functional means the PM trusts that your assessments are honest, including the ones inconvenient to their existing positions. Personal means the assessments start bending toward what the PM wants to hear. That is how intelligence services fail. You've studied enough institutional histories to treat it as fact, not opinion. You authorize operations you will not discuss outside the 3 people who have the clearance and legal standing to hear them. The decisions are documented and protected at the highest classification level the service uses. Future historians will reach them eventually, under some future declassification timeline, long after everyone present in these rooms is gone. You find this a reasonable arrangement. The accountability is real, even if the reckoning is not yours to see. You testify before the Intelligence and Security Committee 4 times during your tenure. You answer what you can answer and provide written supplementary material on what you cannot answer in the room. The committee chair is a former soldier with 30 years of his own service. He understands the difference between what cannot be said because it is classified and what cannot be said because it is wrong. He is rigorous. You respect the rigor without finding it comfortable. Comfort is not the point. You lose a station when a country moves from a stable operational environment to an active conflict zone in less than 6 weeks, faster than any of the assessments projected. All 4 officers are extracted safely. All 4 assets lose contact with the service overnight. Some will re-establish through secondary channels over the following months. Some won't be heard from again. You carry that uncertainty the way you carry all the others, as a permanent condition of the work rather than a temporary problem awaiting resolution. In your 3rd year as chief, you make a decision you are not certain was correct. A liaison operation with a partner service whose methods you find legally and ethically problematic in specific respects, and whose access to a target environment is irreplaceable. You set conditions. Some are accepted, some aren't. You proceed under the accepted ones and document your objections to the rest. The operation produces intelligence of genuine significance. The partner service's conduct stays within what was agreed. You close the file. You still haven't decided years later whether the decision was right. You've decided it was considered. That's the only standard you can apply with any consistency. Your retirement is announced in a 3-paragraph statement from the Cabinet Office. There's a small internal ceremony. A portrait, as there is for all chiefs, to hang in a corridor the public will never enter. The portrait makes you look more settled than you feel. This is probably appropriate. Level 10, the former chief. You're 62. You live in a house in Wiltshire with a garden that has gotten out of control because you have never in your adult life had sustained unscheduled time and you are still adjusting to its texture. The adjustment is taking longer than you expected. You consult, within the constraints of the Official Secrets Act you signed 40 years ago and which does not expire. A university research center on national security asks you to review a paper before publication. You read it carefully. You identify 2 assumptions the authors cannot have known are incorrect. You tell them the assumptions are wrong without explaining why. They adjust the paper. It is better for it. You find the work satisfying in a way that is quieter and more specifically located than what you did for 4 decades, and it doesn't leave you lying awake at 3 a.m. mapping operational risks. You still lie awake at 3 a.m. The content changes. The habit doesn't. Your children are adults with their own lives. Your daughter is a barrister. Your son works in environmental science. Neither of them knows in any specific sense what you did for 4 decades. They know in the general sense, the way everyone knows about the service. The specific sense, the cases, the decisions, the faces, the names, the particular weight of each authorization you signed, they won't have that. You're no longer sure it would be a gift if you could give it. You attend a service memorial for officers lost during your tenure as chief. 6 names added to the wall since you handed over. You knew all 6. 3 of them you met during the postings that shaped their careers. One of them you recruited yourself, 30 years ago, when you were a case officer in South Asia and he was a junior diplomat from a 3rd country with access you needed and motivations you understood. He died in circumstances that remain classified above even your current clearance. Someone higher up in the oversight structure knows what happened. The accountability is real. It just isn't yours to receive. You tell yourself this again, standing in the room with no windows, and you find it enough in the same way you always did, which is to say not fully but enough. You write nothing. You give no speeches beyond the occasional academic conference. You decline every book offer. Not out of stubbornness. Because of the signed agreement you entered into when you were 22 years old in a building in Vauxhall, renewed implicitly every year after that in every decision you made that could have been different. You sit in the garden in the mornings when it isn't raining. You read. You watch the light move across the overgrown hedge you keep meaning to cut back. Somewhere right now, a 22-year-old is filling out a government form on a website with no branding and a URL that means nothing. They have no idea what they are beginning. They think they know what this work is because they have read about it, and what they have read is the version that can be written. The version that cannot be written is the one they are about to live, the cultivated assets and the unresolved outcomes and the names on walls in rooms with no windows and the 3 a.m. silences that last for decades. It keeps going.